Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. I see lots of people introducing themselves in the chat. Fantastic to have you all here joining us today for this learning webinar on innovations in mainstreaming participation. We can move on to the next slide, please. So this webinar is part of a series of 4 webinars that we've been holding over the past couple of months. So the first one we held in mid-May on digital democracy. That was followed by one on inclusive democracy in June, and one on climate democracy also in June. Please do look out for the kind of readouts from those webinars if you weren't able to join them. We've been posting some notes and blog posts on our various different sites about those. But so the one today, as you'll see, is around mainstreaming participation. My name is Tim Hughes. I'm the lead for democracy and participation at the Open Government Partnership. And this webinar is hosted in partnership between 3 different organisations: Open Government Partnership, People Powered, and Trust, Accountability and Inclusion Collaborative. If you've not already, please do select your interpretation option in the menu at the bottom of your screen. We will have one speaker speaking in Spanish, so if you are an English speaker, please do that as well, so you can get the interpretation when she speaks. So before we dive into the detail of the webinar, I think it's important to quickly outline what we mean by mainstreaming participation, because it may not be immediately clear. So the way that I tend to think about this is thinking about 3 different aspects of mainstreaming participation. So the first is making participation more commonplace. So what I mean here is moving from one-off processes and innovations to sustained rights and opportunities for participation. We've seen recently a real wealth of different innovative forms of participation developing around the world, but really the next step is to move from those innovations to kind of properly mainstreamed and kind of commonplace forms of participation. So that's the first kind of facet of mainstreaming participation. The second is about making participation higher quality. So this is really about embedding and mainstreaming the skills, the capacity, the cultures, the processes that are needed within governments, within different institutions, to make sure that participation opportunities are fit for purpose and they're inclusive as well. And the third aspect of mainstreaming participation, I think, is around making participation more impactful. And here, I really mean linking participation opportunities with decision-making and with power. I think too often, particularly when public participation, when projects stay as kind of innovations, maybe on the periphery of governments, they're not fully linked into where decision-making actually happens, and they don't link into those sources of power, which mean that they're impactful. So this is these are the 3 different things that I think about when thinking about mainstreaming participation. But to make that a little bit more tangible in terms of what that might mean in practice, and we'll come on to this in detail in some of the agenda later on. We see lots of different initiatives, lots of different approaches to mainstreaming participation. Some are about institutionalizing specific methods. So we're seeing a big focus at the moment around things like citizen assemblies and making standing citizen assemblies. Sometimes we see approaches to introduce new rights and requirements for participation that might be requiring consultation at certain points in the policymaking process. And these we might consider as some of the sharper tools for mainstreaming participation. But alongside those, and no less important in my opinion, are perhaps some of the softer mechanisms we see being used as well to try to mainstream participation. So that might be culture change initiatives in governments and institutions, to change practices of how policymakers, how officials, how public servants work to better include public participation. It might be about introducing new teams, new training, new guidance that help to increase the capacity and skills for participation. And finally, those all might be considered as things we can do on the supply side to mainstream participation. But of course, there are also initiatives on the demand side as well, whether those be things like civic education, so building the civic skills of citizens to be able to engage, or support for civil society organisations and the different movements and organisations through which people participate in democracy and public life. So there, hopefully that gives us a bit of a foundation as we go through the rest of the agenda for today. So you'll see up on the screen there the different segments of the session we'll be coming to. So first of all, we'll be considering this question of why mainstream participation? Why do we think it's important? Why are we talking about this? And why do we need to address it? Then we'll come on to what, and here we'll have some practical examples and initiatives that are already underway in a few different countries, and we'll hear about those, as well as some of your examples as well. Then we'll come on to the question of how. So how can we support mainstream participation? What are the sorts of initiatives that are trying to support this at a larger scale? We'll have some time for Q&A as well, and next steps. Before, at the very end, having some optional breakout rooms where you can join speakers to have a bit more of an informal conversation at the end of the session today. So coming on next to this question of why should we mainstream public participation? Or sorry, speakers quickly first, and I will go through these in detail when we come to their relevant sections. But you'll see here we've got a great array of speakers from different countries, different contexts, different approaches, and ways of thinking about mainstream participation. So we will introduce those as we go through the session. But let's come to this question of why. And first of all, I want to hear from you in the chat your answer to why do you think mainstreaming public participation is important? So if you want to post your reasons in the chat, we'll read out a few of them, and I will also share a few of my reasons as well. So please do go ahead, give a voice from Daniel. That's a great one, Daniel. Enhancing the credibility and legitimacy of activities. Essential to implement and achieve the SDGs, to build trust, accountability, collecting diverse input, better solutions with diverse perspectives. These are all really good points. Make better decisions. Improving quality of policy and implementation. So some good reasons coming through in the chat. Maybe let me just share kind of three of my own, and then please do continue to post yours in the chat as we go as well. So there are kind of three groups or three reasons that I think are particularly important, just based off of my experience. So the first of these is that, in my experience, participation often fails due to a lack of institutional support. So where we see, and particularly where some of the most kind of innovative forms of participation, things like citizen assemblies that we're seeing a lot of recently, often where we see them not have the impacts that they perhaps deserve to have. It's due, I think, to a lack of institutional support. So the systems and the culture and the way that governments and institutions work don't necessarily always marry up nicely with the public participation innovation. So the first reason I think is to make sure that participation can be successful. The second reason then is that regular high quality participation is required for big impact as well. So as long as some of these more innovative forms of participation stay as kind of one-off, temporary kind of innovations, then the impact is always going to be limited. But if we can mainstream them, if we can embed them in the way that government works, making them much more commonplace, then that can lead to much bigger impacts in the long term. And finally, my kind of third reason is that giving people regular opportunities to shape decisions is good for democracy as well, and also good for societal outcomes. Things like the SDGs, as we saw mentioned in the chat. We have good evidence that shows that where people are more involved in decision making, it often leads to better decisions, better outcomes, more trust, less polarization. So the more that we can mainstream participation, hopefully the more that we can see these good outcomes as well. So I'm seeing lots more being shared in the chat as well. So it seems that we're all on board with this being important. So let's move on to this question of what's then kind of what does this look like in practice? And again, let's come to you first before we hear from our speakers. So if you can share in the chat your favorite examples of initiatives to mainstream or embed public participation, put them in the chat, share any links as well, so people can have a look at those, and we'll collect those up. But as you're doing that, I will introduce you to our first round of speakers who are going to be sharing their perspectives on this, and particularly sharing the initiatives that they are a part of. So we have 3 speakers for this kind of first set of lightning rounds. So first we will hear from Carla de Paiva Bezerra, who is from the General Secretariat of the Presidency of the Republic of Brazil. Then we'll hear from Larissa Barak, who is an advisor at the Secretariat General of the Government of Romania. And finally, we'll hear from Carmen Vilms, who is the product owner of Co-Creation Workspace for Lawmaking at the Ministry of Justice of Estonia. So these are 3 great examples that I think we can learn a lot from. So first of all, we will come to Carla. And Carla, if I can ask you, Brazil is well known for having been a hotbed of democratic innovation, particularly at a local level. But now there's a big emphasis on building national infrastructure and coordination for participation. Can you tell us how these efforts are helping to mainstream participation in Brazil? Over to you, Carla.
Hello, team. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank you, the OGP and People Powered and TAI, for the invitation. And jumping into the question, Brazil, I think we can go to the first slide. And please show all the things, all the points. So Brazil has been, hotbed for being a hotbed for participatory democracy is not a recent trend, but it's actually connected to the history of redemocratization since 1988, when participation became a guideline for all the policies. And since then, a lot has been emerging. We know we know that internationally participatory budgeting is the main showcase, but we have had since the late 1990s a lot of different participatory institutions. So we have citizen councils spread all over the country. We have about 5,000 municipalities, and we have more than 5,000 citizen councils of health, social assistance in all at all local level, but also at state level and federal level. So until 2016, we would have around 100 thematic citizen councils at federal level that would then have kind of a rebound at state and local level. We do have national conferences, which are a gathering of people from a local level up to national level, discussing also the main guidelines that happen like every 4 years. So they are like massive, big meetings of people discussing guidelines for health, guidelines for youth policies from all kinds in all thematics that we have. And we have had also efforts of putting all this together, I'd say, at the state of Rio Grande do Sul, which is where the city of Porto Alegre is, where participatory budgeting was born. We do have had an effort of making a state participation system during back in 2014. And they would put together all these different participatory institutions, making sense of them and trying to make connection with them. At national level, we had a failed effort in 2014 to make a national participatory system as well, but we did face some resistance from the extreme far right. But all this is only possible because we also have a very strong civic society, a very active civil society with social movements playing a key role since the redemocratization. And also to today, they are active in participating not only in demonstrations and other kinds of more contentious politics, which they do, but they also have gotten into the state in a way, helping to elaborate and build public policies, and several very innovative public policies, such as Brazil Without Hunger, have been discussed and implemented partly by social movements. So I think this is a less highlighted feature, but I think it's a very important one to explain why we have had so many participatory institutions in Brazil. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a background in Brazilian politics, but what are we doing now? So we have had a backlash during the previous government, and now Lula is trying to rebuild a lot of the state in a way, and also participatory institutions. And we are doing, so we do have, I would say, kind of like not a system as like a federal system, but kind of like an internal government effort in trying to coordinate participation. So we do have a specific ministry that is responsible for the dialogue of civil society and for promoting participatory spaces, which is called the General Secretariat. Within the presidency, it's kind of confusing because we have several ministries within the presidency, but it's another story. And so we do have, the General Secretariat has this role of coordinating. And so we do have internally several areas that are responsible for answering for social movements' demands, for promoting conferences, citizen councils, and other formats of participation. And we also do have some focal points at each ministry. So like one person that is responsible in that ministry to help to be accountable to the General Secretariat, to present what is being done in that, let's say, Ministry of Environment and Climate Action. So what are you doing regarding participation? How are you promoting it? So we do have several thematic councils on, let's say, climate change, on environment protection, and we are promoting, for example, in this specific ministry, they have conferences for kids also, not only for adults. They have several different formats, so we kind of have this overview of what the government is doing regarding participation. And one specific thing that I would like to highlight, I'm currently director of digital participation, and I'm responsible for building the Brasil Participativo platform, which is an effort to have like only one public face of digital participation for every citizen, in which we put together like all these different spaces, conferences, councils. The idea is that they are all presented. We have also public consultations that are exclusively digital. The idea is that all this ecosystem can be presented for the citizen in one single place, which is Brasil Participativo. So this is an effort of integrating both digital and in-person processes, and also putting all of the government in one place together for the citizen, as the citizen is not interested if it's from the health minister or from education. He knows about, the person knows about the government. So the idea is to show one place, all connected. So I would say that this effort is a good way of mainstreaming participation, of showing how participation can be connected and interconnected in all areas of government.
Fantastic.
That's all for
Thank
now.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. Fantastic to hear how Brazil is continuing its long history of democratic innovation and public participation, and particularly appreciate you making the link to the role of social movements as well, and the importance, I think, therefore, of civic space, and considering that within this as well. So next, we're going to travel from Brazil to Romania to hear from Larissa. And Larissa, if I can ask you, Romania has introduced several reforms on participation through its open government action plans and beyond, including on streamlining consultation and introducing participatory budgeting. Could you tell us how these are helping to embed public participation in how government operates?
Sure, Tim. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity the invitation and the opportunity to share our experiences here. So Romania has, if we can also change to the next slide, thanks. Romania has the legal framework for transparency and participation in the decision-making processes in place since 2003, which is quite a long time. However, in practice, following governmental monitoring and civil society feedback, we have realized that although there was gradual improvement of the process, the practical implementation of the law was not uniform. And to some extent, we perceived it as not so relevant because it was many institutions were only complying with the minimum obligations, and there was this resulted in less actual engagement. So for the past years, the Secretariat General of the government, both through the OGP plans, but also through the work of the dedicated team in the Service for Open Government, have been implementing a series of actions with a clear objective of mainstreaming public participation in the public sector. And I would name a few of these actions, and you will see that we are trying to make them sort of complement each other, so we cover lots of bases in this process. One of them is regular yearly monitoring and transparent reporting of the implementation practices, which is got more standardized year by year, and from both central and local authorities. And this enabled us to identify the challenges, the gaps, issue recommendations, and then tailor our support to public bodies. Another thing we have done is the development of secondary legislation. So we had the law in place, but we felt that this secondary legislation for the application of the law was needed. And this was adopted in 2022 and includes clear guidelines for institutional roles and processes, as well as uniformization of practices, both in terms of where, when things are published or available, and so on and so forth. We also ensure permanent assistance to public sector representatives but also training, which is provided both for public servants and civil society, so as to capacitate both sides. And this is done through NRRP funds in the past year and the current year. And now the available processes and framework are complemented through the redesign. We already have a public e-consultation platform. However, we are redesigning it, and it is currently under development. And this will be a one-stop shop for centralizing all online public consultation processes and the respective interactions. Complementary, we are also developing our first national open government strategy due to be adopted this year. And there we have included, or we plan to include several or lots of actions related to mainstreaming public participation, such as extending the existing OGP MSF forum to an open government forum with subcommittees working on specific issues, including participation, make regular training available for public servants, and encouraging innovative approaches to public participation. I would also note, just as a more specific example, in our 2022-2024 OGP National Action Plan, we have developed a first set of guidelines for participatory budgeting. This was made following consultations and collection of best practices, but also challenges from the local level, from all over the country. And the guidelines that will soon be published and be available we hope it will work as an instrument that will facilitate the take-up of participatory budgeting in more local authorities. So basically what we're working on is going from the inputs and processes that we have in place, and once all these are in place and working okay, we hope to be able to focus more on the outputs and the actual impact of these participatory practices. Thanks, that's from me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Larissa. I think what's really interesting to me of the Romania case is just the number of kind of different initiatives, different things that are happening to mainstream participation. And we heard you talking there around everything from secondary legislation to guidelines to training to kind of establishing things like participatory budgeting and things like the open government strategy as well. It's clear that you're taking a very comprehensive approach. So next up, we will make the shorter distance travel from Romania to Estonia to hear from Carmen. So Carmen, if I can ask you, you're leading a project to develop a comprehensive co-creation platform that, among other things, is going to allow citizens to input into the creation of new laws and track which lobbyists and stakeholders are seeking to influence the lawmaking process. Can you tell us how you hope this platform will help to embed public participation in lawmaking in Estonia?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Tim, for the question, and thanks for inviting me. The idea of the co-creation workspace of Estonia that I'm working on is to provide a digital platform covering the whole legislative cycle, from drafting a draft act till publishing it in the State Gazette. And the project has several objectives, of course, but what concerns the public participation, the goal is to offer first a more transparent lawmaking process. In order to achieve this, each initiative has its own workspace and timeline in the co-creation workspace. And public events that take place during the legislative process can be seen on that timeline by anyone interested. Such public events during the process can be, for instance, meetings with stakeholders or lobby groups, information about public consultations, but the list is not exhaustive. And users are nudged to keep relevant information about events of potential public interest accessible from the timeline of the initiatives. Secondly, the goal is to offer possibilities of earlier inclusion, meaning that from the co-creation platform, one can find information about initiatives from as early as the analysis phase of the problem. This way, stakeholders can show their interest from early on to follow the course of a process, give useful information about the impacts, or even show their interest to participate as a co-creator of a draft. Of course, in the end, it is up to the drafter to decide who shall participate in the drafting, but if decided so, then the infrastructure is there in place. Thirdly, the new platform will provide user-friendly text-related comments and feedback. The new system is not document-based anymore, but it is data-based. Therefore, giving comments to a draft during the public consultation becomes more comfortable, and comments will be text-related, like comments in any other widely used text editor. As comments become more visible, then giving feedback to these comments cannot be ignored so easily either. Currently, the project is still in the developing phase, but some parts of it have already been tested with the users, and the results are quite promising, I would say. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Carmen. I think it's so interesting how you're developing this approach of kind of real end-to-end lawmaking process and making that much more transparent, accessible, open to the public. And anybody knows it, who knows Estonia knows the kind of I guess Estonia is a digital leader. So it's really interesting also how you're bringing together existing platforms as well as part of this. Things like, I'm going to completely mispronounce this, Ravagutus, which is I think was one of the well, has been one of the innovations in digital democracy in Estonia. So thank you very much for that, Carmen. So those were three presentations, three different approaches to what mainstreaming, embedding public participation can look like in practice. And I've seen lots of examples being shared via the chat as well, which is fantastic. We'll make sure we capture all of that so we can share it back with you as well. If you have any questions for speakers, please also do capture those in the chat. And when we come to the Q&A section later, we'll try to get through as many of those as possible. But next, let's move on to this question of how. So how do we mainstream and embed public participation, which can be very challenging. So in the chat, I also want you to post what you think are the biggest barriers and challenges to mainstreaming public participation. So please add those to the chat. And as you do that, I will introduce you to our second round of lightning speakers. First up, we will hear from Amanda Luz from People Powered. She's the Learning Programs Manager and based in Brazil. Then we'll hear from Rachel Mims, who's Program Director for Citizen Participation and Inclusion at the National Democratic Institute and based in the United States. And then we'll hear from Valentina Zendaya, who's the Country Director for Mexico at the Avena Foundation based in Mexico. So if we can come to you first, Amanda. So People Powered and your partners are approaching this topic of mainstreaming and embedding public participation. Can you tell us a bit about how you're doing that and what resources and support you're developing to enable the mainstreaming and embedding of public participation?
Yes, thanks, Tim, and hi, everyone. I'm responsible for capacity building programs and courses at People Powered. And today I'll be happy to share with you an upcoming training opportunity. But first, answering to Tim's question, let's start with the challenge that is guiding our work and then how the new resources and training will address that. So we all want governments turning innovations into mainstream practices, but this work is really hard. We hear this from many government reformers and organizations, like some of you in the audience. Some people say that they want to give up because they can get support and resources to move the work forward. Others just don't know how to win the political buy-in or overcome government indifference. Some people say that they need more help in engaging the public or accessing legal frameworks. So this this kind of challenges and other ones is a reality for people in different countries, different levels of experience, and different roles as well in the government. Next slide, please. We don't want people to feel alone or frustrated in this mission, and that's why we are developing global resources and training for a learning program for people like some of you in the audience to overcome these challenges and turn pilot programs or innovations into long systemic change. In other words, our new resources and program will support more people to mainstream public participation, practices that are more fit for purpose, more high quality, and of course, more inclusive as well. Next slide. This program is called Mainstreaming Participation Accelerator, and it is being led by the Institute of Public Finance in Kenya, with the support of People Powered and OGP for the development of the training and resources. And this work is possible because of the support of the National Endowment for Democracy. But all the resources are being developed with regional partners and legal experts to make sure this learning content attend specific needs and challenges like the ones I just described, especially of governments and organizations in the Global South. So this new accelerator will connect government reformers with hands-on and effective content in 5 ways in the next slide, please. First, we'll have in-person workshops that will be held in Nairobi, Kenya. Second, participants will receive dedicated support and guidance from a mentor. In our accelerators, we realize how people really value this specific guidance. Third, they will also have step-by-step resources to guide participants in designing their solution for their particular challenge. Fourth, they will have additional support in Zoom sessions and a training platform for self-paced learning. And last but not least, of course, people in our accelerators really value the possibility of connecting with peers from around the globe for exchange and learning, because very often people have same challenges and different solutions in different parts of the world. So on the next slide, you can see a snapshot of the 5 components of the training that participants will receive during the 6 months of the program, from the kickoff workshops in Nairobi until the end, when they will present how they will improve or mainstream participation in their communities. We are opening the call in October. I'm going to talk about this, but participants will start the program in March next year and then around September. So if you work in the government sector and want to effectively transition democratic innovations to a common governance, a best practice, or if you're part of civil society organization, supporting or advocating for mainstreaming democratic innovations, this will be a program for you. So next slide, a very important slide. If you're interested in participating, I hope you are, stay tuned. The call for applications will be opened in October. I suggest that you sign up for our newsletter as well for People Powered, IPF, and OGP channels to be in the loop. I'm happy to talk to you more about the accelerators in the breakout room as well. And that's it. So thank you. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Amanda. A fantastic opportunity there for everyone, and we're really excited about it at OGP. So please do sign up to the newsletters, kind of keep a watch out for that. I'm seeing in the chat some questions coming through for speakers, and actually some speakers have already been responding to some of them as well. So that's absolutely fantastic. A few people have identified some of those biggest kind of barriers and challenges. So I'm seeing political ill will for devolution, the nature of kind of an adversarial democracy, political will as well coming through there. So keep those coming in via the chat. But next, we're going to hear from Rachel. And Rachel, if I can ask you, so the National Democratic Institute, or NDI, has established a program to support efforts to mainstream participation in Central and Eastern Europe. Can you tell us what you've learnt from this program so far?
Hey, Tim, thanks for having me. I'm happy to talk more about this program. So NDI, for those that aren't familiar, NDI works to strengthen and mainstream participation across many different types of programs in diverse political contexts. And this is through both partnerships with civil society and political institutions. The program I'm talking about today is relatively new. It's funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, and it's specifically to help democracy practitioners and partners better understand how to both socialize and institutionalize participatory and deliberative approaches, particularly considering some really challenging political contexts. And a part of this kind of came from our partners, from civil servants, public officials, kind of feeling like the resources that were being made available didn't quite match what was happening in their political context. This program launched with a focus on Central and Eastern Europe, but in the second phase of the program, we'll start to explore some of the same questions in a second region, with a component of the program focusing on connecting actors across regions, particularly thinking about global South to South collaboration. So under this first phase of the program, we're working with a civil society organization in Serbia that has experience implementing participatory processes and collaborating with elected officials. NDI and the partner are co-creating a learning agenda, exploring lessons learned and challenges associated with implementing PDD, but more specifically, how to secure government buy-in on the use of PDD processes in challenging contexts, and offer lessons to civil society and other stakeholders on what's working. And this includes a better understanding of the role that civil society organizations can assume beyond implementing a process, so that there's a more enabling environment to support some of these PDD processes. Under the same program, we're also working directly with civil servants and elected officials, specifically champions and allies of participatory approaches, by creating opportunities for them to network with each other, discuss their experiences with PDD, including challenges and opportunities, and refine this learning agenda. During a recent convening of civil servants and elected officials in Poland, participants discussed some of their experiences with these processes, as well as some of the support that they need to create and strengthen a more enabling environment. And a lot of these examples and the points on the slide come directly from the participants who were there from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Hungary, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. So this first point, grow and strengthen a network of support and tailored resources for public officials and civil servants. I think it's great that we're coming after people powered, as you can see that they're also identifying that civil servants and public officials need more support, more targeted support. So some of the things that we've heard and have facilitated for civil servants and public officials are a gathering and regional gathering, so they are able to meet and discuss their experiences with peers in government, particularly peers that are working at a similar level of government, whether that's local municipal level or national level. A tailored training and resources, and specifically thinking about who we should be targeting within government, and thinking about civil servants who are allies, champions of participation that may have a longer mandate than elected or appointed officials, but also considering like how we might work with them along with, both mandated and appointed elected officials. And then a point I sort of made earlier about like making sure that the case examples and research are relevant and kind of match what's happening in their political context as well as operating realities, and prioritizing more of the case studies that demonstrate global South to South sharing, as well as examples that prioritize the inclusion of marginalized communities. Under the second point, increased collaboration, transparency, and trust between civil society stakeholders and civil servants. So along with these regional gatherings, also identifying opportunities to bring civil servants and civil society organizations together that have been really crucial in implementing, supporting different PDD processes. And this includes both providing technical support to both groups. So in a current program where we're working in Bosnia, we have civil society organizations both moving through People Power's Accelerator program, as well as work that we're doing with the civil servants and public officials who are working in that same municipality. So thinking about the support that we can be providing to actors who are working both on the civil society side as well as from within government. And then thinking about how we can strengthen alliances with other stakeholders in the local context, including PDD experts from across the region, academia, civil society, and other students. And then the last point on prioritizing shifting social norms, cultivating political will, creating more of an enabling environment. I saw a lot of these things kind of pop up in the chat. A part of what we're doing with our local partner is identifying gaps and challenges related to implementing or supporting these processes, while also looking at how, shrinking civic space and, other kind of barriers that are being directly imposed by the government, how that is shifting or changing their ability to effectively demand and institutionalize these processes. We're also learning that, there needs to be a lower barrier to entry for PDD. So kind of moving away from, this one size fits all approach and moving away from restrictive mechanisms that dictate that a process can only be designed a certain way. A lot of public officials really, wanted to know more about how they can, better design these processes to fit their context, while also keeping in mind, what the cost benefit analysis is of, reshaping or redesigning a process. And then using that same example from Bosnia, there were many, mechanisms for participation that already exist. So the approach was more so, how do we bolster and improve some of these existing processes in partnership with civil society, as opposed to putting all the resources into a wholly new process. And some of that also means reframing what success looks like, and creating more metrics around kind of a focus on accountability and what happens around and after a process, and really understanding how citizen awareness of a process and participation around and after a process can change the perception of the outcome. And then lastly, we're also investing in additional research on kind of understanding and countering norms within the political context that prevent or create barriers to participation. And some of these norms we've heard directly from public officials around, even when these mechanisms exist, citizens don't want to participate, right? So like, how do we kind of shift and make some of these processes more accessible in direct conversation and collaboration with civil society organizations who have implemented PDD processes, so that knowledge is being shared through a two-way channel, as opposed to kind of one-off sharing or one-off participation in a process. So I'll pause there, but also happy to answer any questions or provide more information.
Great, thank you very much, Rachel. Fantastic to hear all of the great work that NDI is doing, and your final point there around shifting social norms, I think particularly rings true for me. It can be all too easy to focus on the surface level, kind of trying to change the processes, kind of introduce new projects, but actually some of those kind of mental models and the social norms that lie behind them are even more important to try to affect. So next up, we're going to hear from our final speaker, Valentina from Avena Foundation. Valentina is going to speak in Spanish, so if you need the English translation, please do make sure that you've selected English in the interpretation. But Valentina, at the Avena Foundation, you're supporting democratic innovation projects in Mexico. Can you tell us your approach to supporting these innovations to become mainstreamed and embedded?
Buenos días. Good morning. I thank you very much for inviting me. Before I'm going to... So Avena Foundation is an organization from Global South, from Latin America, and we are 30 years old, and we want to make systemic changes with new economic resources, but also with strategic collaboration. I'm going to talk about an example in which we have philanthropy collaboration to enhance participation. Since last year, we have been working with the civic space. Here we have the slide. So since last year, we are working with Surge Alliance. It's a synergy of 4 organizations: Open Society, Ford Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, and Avina Foundation. And what we try to do is to support emergent NGOs, organizations, and we try to work with coalitions and social movements in Mexico and in different topics. So it's social justice, institutional justice, and peace and security and justice, because we believe that it's very important for these organizations to work together to foster civic space. So for us, it's very important to focus in strengthening in a collaborative way, especially for those NGOs or grassroots organizations who do not necessarily have money or funds. So especially we work with these marginalized groups. For example, we work with indigenous groups, we work with rural communities, with feminist movements, with people from LGBT plus movement. We also look for different organizations that haven't received enough money or funds before. We also try to diverse geography, because we have a centralized government, and generally, like, the big cities have all the fundings. So what we want to do is to get to smaller rural areas. Besides, we want these processes to have these 3 elements that I'm going to share, because we think that it's very important to foster innovation and participation. First, we want the organizations to be able to read the context, and that could identify the opportunities according to the economic context to improve their work and to reach or achieve their goals. The second, we want to collaborate and to have dialogue between different sectors, between different agencies. We have been having too much polarization in Mexico. We don't have a good dialogue, so we want different sectors to work together, like, for example, public and private sectors. We want them to collaborate, to work together. And in the third element, we want to support processes that work with different communication strategies and new narratives for these stories, these voices to be heard beyond the social, the civil society. We want to be heard in different circles, in different areas. And I want to add another one, which is the way in which we do philanthropy. We want to transform the bonds between civil society and philanthropy, and we use the trust-based philanthropy principles. It has to do, you can search even more in the webpage, and we have flexible resources for the organizations to decide where to use them, and they could also be working with them as they want. We want to have, or to be responsive for non-monetary support. We want to simplify application and reporting processes for the organizations. We want to build relationship-based in mutual accountability. And of course, we want to learn and to listen to be better in the different processes and to adapt the different objectives in the best way. So I go with you, Tim. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Valentina. And thank you to all of our speakers. So we've heard about the how, the what, the why, the what, and the how. But now let's quickly look at next steps and things that you can do to kind of contribute towards this topic. So the first is to take the OGP or OpenGov challenge on public participation. This is something that OGP launched last year. There are 10 different challenge areas, including one on public participation. And the one on public participation, if we can move on to the next slide, focuses specifically around mainstreaming or embedding fit for purpose, high quality and inclusive public participation practices across key government sectors, processes and institutions. So we're calling on both government and civil society working towards open government action plans and open government commitments to think about including a commitment on mainstreaming and embedding public participation, and doing that kind of through your co-creation and kind of multi-stakeholder forum platform. So please do, I'll share a link in the chat. Please do have a look at that. Secondly, you heard a fantastic opportunity from Amanda for the Mainstreaming Participation Accelerator. Do sign up to the People-Powered newsletter and the OGP newsletter as well for more information about that, and particularly when the open call for applications is launched. And then thirdly, just quickly now, we're going to do a quick Zoom poll for your thoughts on this learning webinar. So please do just take a couple of moments to fill that out before we'll move on to a quick Q&A and a bit of time for discussion in breakout rooms. And just as you're doing that, if you want to post any more questions in the chat for the Q&A, please feel free to do that as well. Okay, so let's start off with the Q&A. So we had a few questions come in ahead of the webinar, and I've spotted a few in the chat as we've been talking as well. There are a couple around how to ensure that these processes are inclusive, how to make sure that they reach marginalized communities, and also particularly for those that are online and digital, how to reach those who are perhaps not digital natives and don't necessarily use tech in their daily lives, or certainly not to the level of kind of engaging with government and decision making. So I want to see if any of our panelists have any thoughts on that, how to ensure that these processes are inclusive, how to make sure that they reach marginalized communities. Anybody want to come in on those questions?
Maybe can I?
Yeah, Carla, please go ahead.
So I think that's a very good question. I saw in the chat also that they were also discussing how to go beyond digital, although we know that digital can reach more people, but we know also that it kind of marginalizes specific populations. And the idea of what we are trying to do is to bring together the better of the digital and the in-person, so that we know that in-person reaches less people at the same time, but also has some advantages. So we kind of trying to bring in the best of each, putting together, connecting in-person and digital processes, a way of trying to overcome the limitations that we have in both cases. We do know also that some limitations are hard to overcome. So what we do, for example, in Brasil Participativo, is that we try to look on how to develop the platform in a way that it can be used for more people. For example, in Brazil, more than 60% of the population uses internet only through a mobile phone. So we developed the platform mostly for mobile use, which is not always a concern when we're thinking about internet inclusion. So I think there are some specific actions that we can do to make the digital more reachable from all populations and all publics.
Great, thanks, Carla. Amanda, perhaps I can also put the question to you, because I know that People Powered have a lot of resources. You're doing a lot of work around inclusive public participation. So is there anything that you'd kind of you'd point out from that?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a little similar to what Carla said. Mobile is really important, especially when we talk about global south and people connecting. So we do have a training platform that people can connect, just self-paced learning, but also they can download things on PDF, so they don't use data or videos that are they don't consume a lot of internet data. This has been a highlight for our program, especially for participants in Latin America and Africa. We also work a lot with languages. I think someone in the chat mentioned the language barriers that also happened, and translations and all. So we have translations that are mostly automated, but also revised by interpreters in different languages, so more people can participate and overcome some of the barriers in the digital space, especially in trainings that are very English-centered. Just two examples I would highlight.
Great, thanks very much, Amanda. So we also had the question right at the beginning, I think in response to something I said about, is mainstreaming the same as embedding? Maybe, maybe not. So maybe I'll just say something quickly on that, because I think the language around this is still settling. Some people talk about embedding, some people talk about mainstreaming, others about institutionalizing. There's lots of different words that are used kind of that kind of mean similar things, perhaps have slightly different connotations, and used kind of quite interchangeably. So yeah, I think it's probably going to take a little while for us to agree on exact definitions around this, but kind of hopefully you got a sense from what I said about the sorts of things that we're kind of considering within this, certainly from OGP's point of view. There was also a really interesting question that I think kind of came in ahead of time around understanding the change management process of participatory processes, and what perhaps I'm interpreting that as kind of some of the softer work that needs to be done to change kind of institutional cultures and the way that perhaps policymakers think about and kind of go about the work that they do. So I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts on that. Maybe Larissa, from the work that you're doing in Romania, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think it's, as I've mentioned, it's a process and it's gradual to change this culture of openness and participation. So obviously you need a mix of measures, such as trainings, sharing best practices, sharing, sorry about the outside, it's a bit noisy. Of course, promoting champions, and best practices and stories, which of course are, as we know in the OGP, are the best way forward to scale up things. So it's just a matter of time until the culture within the public administration is changed, so that such participatory approaches are embedded, let's say.
Great, thanks, Larissa. And Rachel, you touched on this in your presentation as well. Anything in particular that you'd pull out?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I mean, one is the barrier to entry is a little bit higher for this one, but just starting with conducting some more specific social norm and behavior research around what are some of the limiting beliefs, social norms, harmful social norms that are creating barriers, so that we can create interventions around some of those beliefs. And then I would say another thing that our partner is doing in Serbia is both identifying, these allies or champions within government, but also exposing them to different types of participation. And they are also working with the local municipality to provide training for municipal officers. So I think those are a few different ways where the CSO is kind of working directly in partnership with the local municipality, where there is that openness and a relationship to start to embed some of this knowledge and principles that will help kind of socialize these processes, but also kind of destigmatize these processes in terms of there's a lot of misunderstanding about what they do and don't do. So having and opening that conversation, I think, has helped in terms of shifting some of those norms.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. So I'm seeing another question in the chat. How can we engage government officials when we're starting? Kind of identifying champions within the civil service, and so I guess whether to start at a local level and linking to things like the SDGs. So anybody with thoughts on that from a civil society perspective, how to best engage government policymakers on these issues? Maybe I can start just quickly on, I think OGP can be one avenue for this. So engage with your OGP process. And so many of you will be in countries, and some of you also potentially within kind of local areas that are members of OGP. And as part of that, there should be a co-creation process between government and civil society to set the commitments that go into open government action plans and to kind of co-create new reforms. So that's one fantastic avenue to engage with government and kind of put this on the agenda, encourage them to consider this as an area for reform within OGP. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that from our panel?
I can say one thing. I think this is a very common question that comes on our accelerators. I think people in different contexts, they want to learn how to engage government, and this will depend also on their context and also on the need that they have in hand. What it has been valued now from our participants is to discuss this with a mentor, for example, with experience on engagement practices that they could use. But also we have specific training content on this, so people can find different ways to engage, not just one or two, but different ways to make sure the implementation goes well in partnership with the government to be more effective and sustainable.
If I can just intervene very shortly, I think it's important also that we have appointed people for this in each institution. For example, for this, for the access to public information, we have compulsory mandatory appointment of responsible people within each institution, and this is published transparently and available on their website. So this could even be a small step, but maybe it's important so that there is a counterpart for to kickstart these discussions that is officially appointed.
That's a good point, Larissa. I've often wondered why we have kind of chief digital officers or chief kind of data officers within government, but no chief participation officer. So maybe that's something that we could all think about. So there is also a question in the chat from Louise around how are governments monitoring and evaluating participatory processes? And I think there was one a similar question earlier as well. So does anybody want to comment on that? How to monitor and evaluate these processes?
So I think monitoring and actually offering feedback on participation is one big challenge. I think before, so I would go just like one step backwards, that most participatory processes often don't offer a feedback on what has been decided. So I think this is like the first step to actually then be able to monitor if the implementation is accordingly. So if you don't first know what has been decided and how, and this is very crucial for people to actually want to participate again. Because if you put time and effort and you don't have any feedback and don't know how what you decided has been used by the government, you don't feel like participating again. And then I think that's why, for example, participatory budgeting is so effective and famous, because people can actually see what has been decided happening in their street when you have like a paved street or something like that. So I don't think we have like the tools for monitoring are the same as the tools for monitoring the execution of any public policy. I think the real challenge lies within the will of the government to actually monitor and show that, for example, something has not been implemented accordingly. Or so I think the actual challenge is more political than from a technical tool or something.
Great, thanks for that, Carla. And I saw People Powered also shared a response and a link in the chat as well. So we are at past and we have 15 minutes remaining. I want to make sure that we've got at least a little bit of time for the breakout groups. So I think we'll go into breakout groups now just for the remaining time, so you can have a conversation with our panelists. So if you'd like to join Carla and Amanda, then you'll need to select room 1. If you'd like to join Larissa and Rachel, it's room 2. And room 3 will be Carmen and Valentina. So we'll set those breakout rooms up now. Please select one, have a chat, and then we will close in 15 minutes.